Well, hello everyone. It's Pastor Jeremy checking in for our Wednesday midweek check-in. I am recording this on a Tuesday night. If you've not seen, it just keeps going. Our entire family has the flu, as best as we can tell. All other four members of my house tested positive, and they're feeling bad. I've had symptoms off and on for a couple of days now. I just didn't get tested because honestly, at this point, we kind of assumed what's going on. So I would appreciate your continued prayers. I thank you to everybody that's reached out to us over the last few days, really the last few weeks. I feel like at this point, it's one of my favorite movies is Groundhog Day. If you're familiar with it, it's the same day over and over. And we have just had sickness upon sickness since we've moved here. And it is obviously nothing that we can control as far as we know, but it is frustrating because we all want to be out in the world, and I feel like we're missing out on some things. And so I just want to thank you all for your patience during this season. So many people have told me, I remember when we had kids that age, it's just part of it. And I think there were a lot of things we were prepared for as parents, but I just never thought about just perpetual sickness for going on about 4 months now. So anyways, with that said, our hope is to have everybody healed up in the next couple of days, and maybe we'll get a little bit of a streak of health. I know many of you are sick, and so this is not just about us. There's just so much illness going on at our schools and with our families and just all around church folks. And so we're continuing to pray for everyone. We know that it's just been a lot. I think we're protective for so long, and we went through masking and all that kind of stuff. And so we've kind of gone back out into the world, and it's just really starting to attack our system. So hopefully we're getting that immunity. That's enough talk about the medical stuff for today. Tonight for our devotion, I want to do something a little bit different, which at this point is kind of standard for Wednesday night. Instead of looking at the text that we have for our narrative lectionary, honestly, as I was going through the Advent series, I felt the need to change several times. And so this Sunday we're going to be in Isaiah again, and not the text that was actually already set up, which I think was also Isaiah. But anyways, we're going to be in a different Isaiah text this Sunday. And so what I was thinking about, and since I had a little extra time on the computer today, since we were quarantined, is I want to talk a little bit about the war on Christmas and the way that we respond to it. And so I'm kidding when I say the phrase "the war on Christmas," but man, you hear this a lot. I will say I don't know that it's been such a hot button topic the last few years. And because of that, I think it's a good time to maybe look at a little bit of history of how Baptists have recognized Christmas and how we've celebrated, looking at the timeline of history just a little bit, and talk about just a few things. Because for a long time, it always seemed like people thought that Christians were under attack at Christmas, as if like the world was conspiring against us. They were drawing battle plans, and they wanted to remove anything to do with Jesus out of the equation. And it was just, how dare they attack this sacred institution? And so, a couple of years ago, it was Starbucks. They changed their Christmas cups, and it wasn't, I guess, Christmassy enough for everyone, and that made them mad. And you hear every now and then these stories pop up about these anti-Christian messages that are out there. And people don't want to honor the reason for the season. We say this a lot: Jesus is the reason for the season, and we believe that. But studying our history, and I think this is interesting. I'm sorry if this is not interesting to everyone, but Southern Baptists and our church, though we are dually aligned, our history from the inception would go back with the Southern Baptist Convention. And Southern Baptists did not recognize Christmas up until the 1800s. And so that's important to remember, because sometimes we think that this institution that began with the manger and from then on out was established, and on the first year and the second year and the third year, everybody remembered Jesus' birthday on the 25th and they celebrate it. And how dare these corporations try to ruin an institution for us? But in our own tradition, it was just vaguely celebrated in the early 1800s. And so it was really 1860s before inside of churches that it was recognized. Now, here's the problem with telling these kind of histories. You kind of get some murky information. And so keep in mind that this is as best as we can tell. And I read a few sources that had a little bit different timelines, because some said that Christmas really took off in the Northeast first, but there are others who are saying that in the South, there were traditions with bonfires and fireworks and pork instead of the traditional turkey, and people would do cheap presents in the early 1800s. And so we're seeing in different parts of the U.S. there are recognition of what we may consider probably today more of the commercial Christmas, but eventually what started happening was churches began to pick up on the celebration, and they started to have more events tied up to the birth of Christ. There's a lot of different ways that it happened, whether it be slowly instituting Advent candles and wreaths and decorations and things like that. But for the most part, it wasn't that the church had this holy tradition and then people would throw parties because of it. It was actually probably the other way, where people were celebrating these festivals. Sometimes people will say it was pagan traditions, and that's some validity in that. But the church was able to see something that was going on in the world, and they were able to capitalize it. And so over time, you would hear Christmas songs and Christmas music and different things that would start to shape more of Christmas in the way that we would recognize. But, our Catholic brothers and sisters, they were probably acknowledging Christmas around, I think it's 330, 336 with Constantine. And so this is part of their liturgical calendar year. But really, Protestant, at least Baptist, this was not a thing until the 1800s, and it's honestly because we didn't want to be seen as being too Catholic and wanted to be free from all the rituals that were there. This is important, though, because, again, sometimes when we think about our tradition, we assume that it has always been this way, but it isn't. It isn't always been part of our identity. My father-in-law is a music minister in Frankfurt, and he is a kind of a high church tradition Baptist church, and do many more liturgical elements and all these things. And he told me a few weeks ago, he's like, I don't even remember doing Advent growing up. And so somebody growing up Southern Baptist in the 60s, 70s didn't even really do it. And so we still have this vague notion of Advent and the Christmas season, but still Christians have been very protective of it. I think of some things that we saw in popular culture. Charlie Brown Christmas. Even my own dog has gone commercial. There's a spiritual moment with Linus, but it seems like even in that, there was this idea that we have lost the true meaning of Christmas, which in fact is Christ, but it's just not how it had always been practiced. One other note, in Southern Baptist tradition, one of the things that helped us to acknowledge Christmas the most was a missionary by the name of Lottie Moon. You recognize this from the Lottie Moon Christmas offering. And in 1888, Lottie Moon helped organize an intentional week of missions giving amongst the WMU to support international mission work. She got this idea from our United Methodist brothers and sisters who were doing something similar, and she had seen the year before. And so really, 1888, you think of Lottie Moon being the institution of Southern Baptist Christmas International Missions Giving. You're looking at 1888 before it was really even a thing. And so it's something to be aware of as well. So that's some of the religious sides. But we talk about commercialization. And so just very quickly, this isn't a typical Wednesday night devotion, and I know this. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, everybody loves the song Rudolph. This was a publicity stunt by Montgomery Wards, where they wanted to create a tradition that everybody loved, and so they buy more things, and so they gave everybody this book of Rudolph that they created. And think about how many people have sung that song because of them. Santa Claus. Everybody loves Santa Claus, right? Well, Santa Claus, as we know it, is a product of Coca-Cola advertising in 1930s. The image of Santa that we are traditionally seeing is 1930s. And so not that people would say Santa is a real Christian St. Nicholas, which is yesterday St. Nicholas Day, but Santa Claus is not actually, what we know of has only been going on for about 90 years now, roughly 90 years. So we're talking timeline. I promise I'm going somewhere with this. So you saw that some folks were gathering during this Christmas season in the South and maybe in the Northeast in the 1800s, and they start to gather. But, you look early on 1900s, 1950s, you see everybody's in church, right? Well, everybody's in church and all of this commercialization stuff is happening. So just think about what naturally is going on. If people keep buying stuff, corporations keep selling it. And so many of the people who are railing against those who have harmed Christian, traditional, whatever, are actually probably the ones who are participating in it. because people were selling what they knew was going to work. I say all that again because sometimes we get caught up in the meaning of what we think something is, and we lose out on what is really going on. One other war on Christmas thing that you see sometimes is the Xmas. People get real mad about this. Well, how dare they take Christ out of Christmas, and there's no Christmas without Christ. But this goes back to the Greek letter chi, which was used for Christ, and we've seen it in many ways. Some people believe it's for shorthand purposes. So this was not some evil vendetta to get rid of Christ. This was actually a way to honor it, but also maybe be efficient with things. And so that's important. Okay, why have I gone on for this long with this history? I think it's interesting, but here's why I've done so. When we look up our history, what we end up finding with churches are a lot of unnecessary battles. The fact that we call it the war on Christmas. You know, you've heard the worship wars about types of music. Christians use war for really dumb things. And so you think the war on Christmas. But a lot of times what we probably see is that Christians have been celebrating maybe the commercialized Christmas, the Santa Claus, the gifts, the presents, all that kind of stuff. And at the same time, slowly trying to figure out how to honor the more spiritual side. But to listen to some people, the most important thing I'm going to do this year is to make everybody understand that Christmas is about Jesus, and don't you dare do anything that's going to mess with that. And what happens is we look like a bunch of angry folks. We look like a bunch of people who can't have any fun. We look a bunch of people who are more worried about arguing a point than we are about doing anything else. In 2 Timothy 2:23, it says this. It says, don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments, because you know they produce quarrels. I'm going to call this for what it is. It has been a stupid and foolish argument that we have taken part of from time to time. And it's not because we don't love Jesus. It's not because we don't have good motives. It's simply because we don't always understand history the ways that we think that we do. What does this matter, though? Why would I spend this time telling you to not worry about the war on Christmas? Well, because I think it points to a bigger issue. One of the things that we really see, that we really struggle with, is that a lot of people will use, well, here's the history of what we've always believed, to keep people from discerning what the Spirit is doing. Occasionally, you'll have people who are trying to do something they think is honoring to Scripture, but people will say, well, that's not our traditional view. And sometimes that is a view that lines up with a creed or something that we generally agree with, the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, where maybe we would be on board with. But sometimes the history that we use is kind of like the war on Christmas stuff, where we argue for something that's really only about the last 100 years or 200 years. And in the process, we are missing out on a lot of other things that have happened in history. It may not matter for the war on Christmas, but it matters for a whole lot of issues. Dr. Beth Allison Barr, in her book, The Making of Biblical Womanhood, I had a privilege of hearing her speak a couple months ago at Georgetown. But she talks about medieval Christian history and how in medieval Christian history, women were called to serve in such a variety of ways, and it wasn't a big deal and it wasn't anything sketchy. But as patriarchy began to dominate government systems more and more, then women were subjected to no longer be in positions of leadership. And so in a church like ours, where we have formed Christian or women in leadership, some may say, well, you're abandoning the traditional Christian history. But the truth is that it just matters what version of history you are looking at, because history is far more complex than we're able to give it to. So what does this mean for us? It means that we are called to engage and to love people in the name of Jesus, but we have to be very careful about how we use history as a weapon against other people. We have to make sure that when we say that somebody is attacking a historic Christian tradition, that we don't just mean a particular Christian tradition of maybe the last 100 years, but that we are looking to the totality of Christian belief, and we are leaning on brothers and sisters who have gone before us. Because as we do so, then we are able to open our minds up to greater possibilities. We have critical thinking abilities, and we should embrace them. But sometimes we get caught up in people who want to rile us against us and say, well, man, it's not Xmas, it's Christmas, it's Christmas. And even though they're doing harmful things with less than stellar intentions. As a pastor, I love for us to acknowledge the meaning of Advent and think about it as a healthy way to prepare our spiritual lives. We can live in the both and. We can celebrate Christmas and do all the fun things and do the Santa Claus, and we can do all those things and have fun with it. And we can say happy holidays to people, and it's going to be okay because we do want people to enjoy the full season in whichever way that they do. While at the same time, we can participate in the work of Advent, which is preparing ourselves to worship, that is preparing ourselves to acknowledge the Christ who was born, the life of Christ, and prepare ourselves for the Christ who will come again, and to participate in that good work in the world. And so there's a history lesson. For some, you may have known this. For some, you may want to pick apart. And like I said, history is something that we can engage in conversation about. But we have to be very careful about the arguments that we pursue, because ultimately the most important thing is that we are able to embrace people with the love of Christ. And if we spend all of our energy arguing about things that don't matter, we're going to lose our ability to speak about the things that really do. I hope that you're having a great week. I hope that if you are feeling poorly, that you will be feeling better soon. And I'm looking forward to gathering with you this Sunday in worship. Hope you have a great week.